I explored toxicity in a previous episode, but we really didn't get into the role of HR in that. And it can be super tricky for HR when confronted with an employee who's saying there's toxicity in the workplace, and you think, maybe there is. What do I do about it? Well, that's what we're talking about today. Hi there, I'm Andrea Adams. This is the HR Hub, and on the show, we get expert insight into anything related to HR. I encourage you to subscribe to the show or to the podcast to keep learning from my guests. So today, I'm excited again to have Dr. Kevin Sansberry. We had a fantastic conversation about the basics of toxicity. Kevin's a behavioral scientist and the host of the Toxic Leadership podcast. He works with larger, complex organizations around solving business problems. And he has an awesome mission around ensuring that everyone is able to use their voice and given a fair shot to succeed. I love that. Hi, Kevin. How are you?
I'm good. Hello, hello. Happy to be back.
Y-
And the topic of HR's role and then these toxic conversations is going to be really fun. So thanks for having me on.
Yeah, well, it's going to be fun. And based on the last episode, I am confident we're going to get through this and we're all going to have a few tools that we can use when these situations come up because they so do.
Yeah.
So, but anyways, we have done that episode on toxicity. If someone hasn't seen that, can you sort of in like 2 minutes to summarize what toxicity is?
Yeah. So we essentially talked about toxicity, and I kind of framed it as an umbrella term because there are a lot of behaviors that we talk about when we talk about toxic workplace and behavior.
Hmm.
But really, the category of behavior or the impact of that behavior are that they lead to a destruction of the relationship or a widening of human connection. And so examples include, micromanaging and intimidation and bullying and all that kinds of things. You can see they all have a very similar impact. And so that's kind of what that umbrella term encompasses typically. And they also have negative organizational outcomes typically. And lastly, we call them toxic because they're pervasive, meaning a lot of times these behaviors spread throughout that network.
We also talked about how easy really it is to use toxicity as a label for all kinds of behavior we don't like in someone else. We also talked about really diving in to what someone means when they come to our office in HR and say,
Yeah.
I'm in a toxic workplace.
And HR in particular has power. And what I mean by that is not even like the power to make employee-based decisions. HR as a function is a basis of power in organization. And so no matter where you are in human resources, you have to counteract that, like proactively counteract that. So like you said, there that weaponized nomenclature and that wording.
Mhm.
HR, at times, I know a lot of folks that work in HR that become cynical because they've seen so many things. They've seen people lie. They've seen people steal.
Yeah.
They've seen a lot of stuff and they become cynical, right? So then their basis of how they view a situation comes with a chip. It comes with like that it already comes with a bit of distrust because they make an assumption before they even get to the facts. And or they could.
Yeah.
And
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
yeah, so though that may make our analysis of a situation seem more, like, more efficient, quicker, I think an HR practitioner's biggest tool, is taking a coach mindset, and one of the biggest wins you get from a coach mindset is you learn how to be non-judgmental, and, because here's the thing,
Mm.
with HR investigations, there's gonna be a judgment at the end. So wait till you get out. Why are you judging the whole time? It's like a researcher. Why how do you don't if you want something to be some sort of way, your data might start to confirm your bias. So
Mm.
you wanna try as best as you can through an investigation process to check your own biases and check your judgment. My assumption that somebody's weaponizing a word may already discount their reality if I'm already thinking about it from that perspective. So I would say, like, as a coach, act like a coach. A great coach is non-judgmental. And the beauty of an HR process is, again, once you get the facts, you get to do a judgment. You get to say, okay, this is what happened. So
Yep.
like I'd say wait until that part.
Yeah.
Like just take in the facts and say, well, what else might be true?
Yep.
What if this person's telling the truth? Telling the truth. Like you have to look at all from all angles. Um, because I've gotten personally caught in that trap myself where I'm like, oh, you're saying this happened, and I don't believe you because I don't believe you because your attendance is wrong or something. Like
Exactly. I totally
you know,
go there. Or you're saying this has happened, but you had this investigation and that investigation, and
right?
you weren't here half of last year, so
Yeah. You're a problem employee. Right. And I
it's
get and I know all of that. I'm part of the HR family. I get it.
yeah, yeah,
But I just would challenge folks to say, like, because the way our brain doesn't really have good discernment of like, oh, we'll use a little bit of bias here because we have past evidence to confirm it, versus bias you don't know you have on an employee because of their race or gender or
oh,
how much they get paid. Your brain is not like gonna like say a little bias and a lot of bias. Your brain is just gonna say bias. So if you can get control of your bias in general, you'll tend to make better decisions. Um, yeah. So and what I'll say by that is bias is easily transferable. And so what that means is if we're using bias because, oh, this person's they had attendance problems, so now I'm labeling them as a problem employee from the get-go when I'm
mhm,
investigating, that is a bias. You don't even have evidence that that's still the case or whatever.
yeah.
What would stop you from your implicit bias in other cases? So be mindful of those neural pathways you're building.
Uh, so, I've had this experience of HR not doing anything, honestly, maybe even me not doing enough because I didn't have the power to do anything, or I thought I didn't have the power to do anything. I'm not a decision maker. The person against whom the complaint is being made, has lots of actual organizational power. And it's easy for us to say that the HR person in that situation should just get more spine, stand up, prove
Mhm.
power, all that business. What do you think?
I think HR and anybody thinking about this they need to do this heavy lifting before they need the heavy lift. So what that means is as humans, we are meaning making machines. And what tends to happen when you don't walk the walk and talk the talk and it doesn't match, people tend to make meaning and they tend to say, oh, this organization's untrustworthy because you said 2 weeks ago we are inclusive and we want to listen to employee voice,
Yeah.
and you didn't even share with us the employee engagement data. You never
Right.
shared it. It's a black hole. So like before we get into like HR having to do something like, oh, manager, I don't have power to say, let's go backwards. What are the rules in this organization and not your policies? What are the
Mhm.
rules of working? What are the ways of working? What are our norms? What do we believe in as leaders, and how we treat people?
Mm.
And if I were HR in a department or in an organization, I would have this conversation with whoever this power people are who have the power, have that conversation before you need to use those rules because now they all help define it. They all co-created it. So what it'll say, here's an example. I have trouble because, I want to step in and I know this leader is toxic and I want to step in. Yet this other VP that's my coworker is protecting this person. Well, it's probably hard to have that conversation when it feels like a HR versus operations.
Yes.
Okay, it's hard. Okay, but imagine if the operations VP and the HR VP and all the other VPs, we sat down well before this event and
Mhm.
we set what are our commitments to each other.
Mhm.
What are our commitments to each other? How do we know we trust each other? What's trust look like for the VP level, right? Because now we just built a collective network. And now we're going to work together to achieve our organizational results. And so now when I reach out to the operations VP about one of their problem employees who is a rock star but having some issues, they're going to talk to me like we're on the same team. So I'm more likely to be like, okay, well, what do you think we should do, HR? What I'm saying is, you need to build these relationship rules and structures before you need to utilize them. Because if you don't, we're going to regress into like more tribal behavior, and we're going to look at it as a us versus them. And that's not the way to be successful with people.
In a related sense, it's easy to address toxicity when you have leadership support, and it's really hard to address, toxicity when you don't have leadership support. Is there anything HR can do when toxic behavior is condoned by management?
Yeah, I mean, well, there's something HR should do. HR should protect the company, and what that means is, hey, I mean, like that's HR's job, no matter who's doing it.
All there to protect the company. I love that.
Okay,
That's great.
okay,
That's so perfect.
okay. So there, so it's HR. Regardless, you don't have their support. Well, HR, you need to do your job. That you can do whatever your job is. That could be, you know what, we're gonna do some training in that department. Maybe they won't let you address the toxic directly or whatever. Okay, well let's do some training on inclusive leadership. Let's have more conversations at the C-suite level about how organizational culture is a competitive advantage, and how do we want to keep that going. Maybe we need to bring, HR has the data. You need to start bringing the numbers, start bringing in the qualitative data, start bringing in how much turnover costs, start talking about leadership transitions. HR needs to utilize all the tools that they have in their locus of control, because by doing that, you're doing your job. And no matter who is a brick wall in your organization, HR needs to do their job in the areas they can, and that is with employee retention data, employee engagement, culture, training and development. All that kind of stuff can be presented still, because that's your job.
Those things that you just talked about, like, for a coordinator or an advisor, someone who's low in the organization, uh, are these things they can do?
You must do a scan of your power, because everybody has power. I don't care where you are in an organization. You have
Yeah.
power somewhere. So as you do your power analysis and you scan out, where do I have locus of control? Where do I have, like if you're a coordinator and advisor, you now have the power of firsthand knowledge. First, you're the first, they came to you. They're not typically going to the VP. So now you got firsthand knowledge, first level data. And your audience at the HR coordinator level and advisory level might be HR leadership, not organizational leadership. So who you're building out your case for and having conversation with is HR leadership. And so you need to make that play and have these conversations strategically. Because at the end of the day, one thing I found really awesome for anybody who wants to thrive in an organization is you need to be able to show confidence, competence, initiative, and
Mhm.
the ability to be strategic. And by you embodying that, no matter you could be the HR. I started off as an HR assistant and left the assistant vice chancellor of human resources for an organization of about 4,000 employees. And I had about 28 people in the HR department. And, so, like, I started off at the bottom, but what I did was I was always demonstrating my ability to be strategic in what I had touch points on, my department
Mhm.
or whatever it might
Mhm.
be, my sub function of HR, specialty in HR. I was always strategic about it. And so you in the coordinator and advisor role have to pull the levers that you have direct access to, and
Mhm.
leverage those unique perspectives that you have direct access to too by through your role.
So, from an HR perspective, can we get to the root cause of toxicity?
Yeah, I mean, there's one that's out of your control, and that's like whatever society that company is in. A lot of the negative aspects of that society tend to permeate into the company. So that's out of our control. But
Do you have an example of that? Like,
oh yeah, hyper competitiveness is a great example. Hyper individualism, when we keep talking about we're a team and we're all this, but yet we're hyper individualistic in the company. We have no team rewards. We don't have any kind of performance appraisal rewards that reward teamwork. We just say it. So like that like at least in the United States is super individualistic as a society. But
Mhm.
yet they get into companies and the companies say, "Oh, work as a team." But you plucked me from a super individualistic society. So what do you mean work as a team? I'm gonna be individual. Like so you have to like so that's what I'm trying to say. Like so the society in which you live in, a lot of those norms permeate into whatever company you work for
Yeah.
automatically. So that's an example. So What is in our control, though, is when we say something like, well, we're a collaborative organization, you can create systems to reward what you say. And you should create systems to reward what you say. So here's how I would do that. If I value collaboration and innovation and project based work in my company, my performance appraisal system would not pay all individual goals.
Yeah.
I would have collaborative shared goals built into the system. I might even do like a 60-40 or a 70-30, something like, let's play it out. 70% of yours is all collaborative. It's all team
Mm.
based
Yep.
achievements. It's all you working as a team. And then maybe the 30% is based off of some individual work, but it's also based off of what's called organizational citizenship behaviors. That's what the research calls it. So that's like
Okay.
what research calls it. But basically what we would call in our company is living the values. So like I would have 30% for you, and that maybe 20% of that is you living the values or you doing your job, and 10% you know what, or vice versa. Like I would have 30% focused on you, but I'd have the rest focused on the us and the we. Your question was getting to the root cause of toxicity. Um, there is a way to do it. And the way to get to the root cause of toxicity is to measure the culture. And what I mean by measuring the
Mhm.
culture, I use an assessment that when we do measurement, we're not measuring employee engagement yet. I mean, at this point, we're measuring
Right.
culture. Culture is not engagement.
Yes.
Employee engagement is an outcome variable of your organizational climate. And your organizational climate is an outcome variable of your organizational culture. So you have outcomes, you have organizational climate, and you have organizational culture. And so, in order to get to the root cause of toxicity, we must measure the organizational culture, which is all the way upstream. And that is, what are the norms, the implicit norms and expectations of this organization? And I'll give you an example of a norm that I measure. I measure something called avoidance. Avoidance is a behavioral norm. I
Mhm.
measure that behavioral norm, and I measure that. And so let's start with, you have a culture of avoidant behavior.
Mhm.
Let's ladder that up. When we look at the climate, we start seeing people not addressing conflict. We start hearing in focus groups,
Yep.
people gossiping behind somebody's back. You're telling this person and not telling the person you need to. We start seeing that in the climate. So then when I get to outcomes, I see high stress, I see low engagement, I see low trust, I see low intention to stay. Those are all examples of different outcomes that I measure too. So it's a scaffolding process, but in order to get to the toxicity, we would think is like, oh, we have burnout and low engagement and stuff like that. Well,
Yeah.
if I went just for outcomes, I would have never gotten to the fact that we literally have a culture of avoidance where avoidance is rewarded. If you solve for that bottom level upstream thing of the culture,
Mhm.
you those outcomes will change. But if we just address the outcomes and not go to the bottom level of what are those cultural norms driving those outcomes, everything you do will be a band-aid fix. HR is effective when HR is not in the room. That's how you know if your HR is effective. Because if y'all are not in the room, let's say we, because I'm a HR
Yeah.
director now,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
but like if we're not in the room and the stuff is still working and something's working, that's how you know you're doing your job well, is because you don't have to be there. If HR has to be in front of people and do training for behavior to change, or if HR has to like throw a policy, you got to sign a policy book every quarter or something. I don't know, but like if HR has to keep pushing this stuff, you're pushing against a natural culture. So you have to work on culture change. The way I operationalize human resources and the function of human resources to be effective is using systems change. And I take a very systems view. And I look at an organizational system as a system which has interrelated
Yep.
departments and needs and people and desires. And so, with that being said, in order for HR to permeate into that system, whatever they want to do, they have to look at it from a systems change perspective. And what that requires is getting to the root cause of what drives the system to do what the system does. And so that requires us not to focus too many, like the employee engagement survey business needs to go out of business because they're measuring an outcome variable. And if you focus on measuring an outcome variable and do action on an outcome variable, you're only gonna make surface level intervention and you're only gonna have surface level impact. And so we must look at like, okay, this outcome variable of employee engagement is driven by what climate factors in the climate. And when we look at those climate factors, some examples might be manager effectiveness, communication, how jobs are designed, employee involvement. Like those are all factors we could measure in climate level. Okay. What's driving that? The cultural norms. And so you go down to what are the predominant cultural norms in this company? Do we have a high achievement orientation or learning company?
Yeah.
Or do we have a very high perfectionistic company? Because I guarantee you, if you measured high in perfectionism as a company, you're going to see different climate factors, which would elicit different outcomes at the end.
Hmm.
So,
I so want to talk to you, and we don't have time, but I so want
yeah,
to talk to you about how you measure culture. It's just gonna have to be another time.
it could be. I mean, I have a survey that I use that measures culture, climate, and outcomes. What we could do is I can share my website and people can read about it.
Yeah,
I've done this with a number of industries,
yeah,
and and the trick is we measure culture every 3 to 5 years, and we measure climate every year. And then all the other stuff looking at like and with climate, I get those outcome measures too, like engagement every year. That's
yeah,
my annual survey or whatever. And so you measure culture takes a while to change, but at least if we're all like you get that cultural measure from us. And what you would get is like, here's how you score. I had a company that was a 99th percentile in the world on perfectionism, meaning high perfectionism.
right,
Yet they had a burnout problem. And they kept trying to do stuff for burnout.
right.
Don't work on Fridays. Well, guess what? I'm still burned out Monday through Thursday, and now I don't work on Fridays, so it makes my Monday through Thursday way worse. How do you address the cultural norm? And so we looked at their cultural measure and said, "Oh, wait, why are we 99th percentile in the world on perfectionism? Let's dive into what that looks like at work." What did that look like is we're spending time trying to make sure everything is perfect and letting like good be, letting what's that?
Anyway,
Let
yeah,
perfect be the enemy of good or whatever it is. Yeah, it's something like that. But yeah, that's what we're doing. Those norms are driving that behavior.
uh,
And so what we did was we started addressing perfectionism, and that led to a decrease in that burnout measure that we had with it, and more trust and all that kind of stuff. So it helped. But again,
it's all
you can't unburn something. So I can't address burnout directly. I have to see why burnout is occurring from a norm standpoint, which leads to the climate factors. Yeah, that the drill now. So yeah,
yeah.
so I
It
could
all goes
definitely
it
check
goes
out my website.
yeah, for sure. It goes back to that, the conversation we were having about root cause. That was a
Yeah,
perfect example.
yeah.
Okay, go to your website, there's stuff there. Any other places you would suggest people go to understand toxicity in the workplace, in HR's role?
What I would say, there's a construct called speaking truth to power,
Yes,
and
there is. Yeah.
I think HR people and we in this field need to look into that because we tend to ostracize people who like speak up about the culture. Who we tend to ostracize unions, because they're like a us versus them. They tend to get ostracized, but there's all behavior makes perfect sense, and there's a reason why they're asking for raises, even though they know we're on budget cuts for 10 years in a row. Okay, I'm not gonna call you stupid.
Yeah.
Um, or I might think that, but I'm not gonna treat you that way. I'm gonna try to like treat you differently. I'm gonna say, why are you asking this? And we had 10 years budget. I'm gonna figure out what can I do to work with you instead of working against you. And how can because we all want to do a good job and we all want to be successful for this company. Because how are we gonna do that? Like, how can I get to that mindset? And so I think like HR folks would benefit from examining how ostracization works and what that looks like at the systems level. Because a lot of HR departments may be ostracizing people and not knowing it. And so looking at like what does othering, that's a term you can look up. It's called othering.
Yeah.
And I would recommend going to the John A. Powell Center of Belonging. I think they're at the University of California, Berkeley. They provide a lot of like examples of what othering is. And so I think, and they talk about othering and belonging. And so I think looking at that kind of language and that kind of research to inform how we become more belonging centric HR practitioners and organizational structures, that would be my advice.
Well, thanks, Kevin. Honestly, my mind's kind of blown by the level of insight you have into what it's like to do HR, but also the useful things to take action on some of those things that are real struggles for us. I just feel privileged to be part of the conversation. Kevin and I did an amazing episode on just the basics of toxicity, and that was super enlightening. I encourage you to check that out right here. Thanks for watching out there. We'll see you next time.